Today's our first day in Freiburg. It's actually our first day in Germany. So let's do some exploring while talking about some misconceptions about megapixels. Let's go. Starting today in the restaurant in the middle of the Black Forest. Well, not really middle, but it's just this restaurant up in the forest here. And let's check it out and talk about megapixels. Alright, so let's begin. First, let's talk about what a megapixel is. It's the amount of pixels in an image, and it's counted in millions of pixels. So 1 megapixel is 1 million pixels. 12 megapixels is 12 million pixels. The camera I have, the Nikon D750, has 24 megapixels, which is 24 million pixels, which, if you check the metadata, the dimensions say 6016 by 4016, which, if you multiply that, that's 24 million pixels. So the big question is, does more megapixels mean better images? Well, yes and no. Yes, because it allows you more leeway when cropping your images, which might give you a better chance of getting a nicer image if you want to crop it in such a way that it'll enhance your image. And no, because the quality of the lens, the quality of the sensor, and the person taking the photo and how you take the photo matters more than megapixel count. Here's one thing you can do with high megapixel count, which is to crop in your photo and get details that you want specifically. So for example, right now I'm only on the 50mm 1.8 and it's not long enough to get only what I want. But since I'm shooting at 24 megapixels, I can crop in and get exactly just what I want. Alright, we are in the main city of Freiburg now, and there's a mall right beside us, and I think there's like a bunch of stuff we can check out. So let's check it out. Alright, so you might be wondering, is a 12 megapixel camera the same thing as a 24 megapixel camera if megapixels don't really matter? Well, no, because they have different megapixel counts, but it's what you do with the camera that really counts. You can use a camera with 12 megapixels and get really awesome shots, like something like the Nikon D3S, which is amazing and I've seen great shots off of it. And also, the quality of the sensor is what really matters. So for example, a 12 megapixel DSLR sensor versus a 20 megapixel phone sensor is not exactly the same thing, and my bet is that the DSLR photos might turn out better than ones taken on a phone. But again, it's always up to the photographer. So how many megapixels in a camera do you need? So depending on what you're going to do with the photo, then you're going to need a different number of megapixels. So for printing, here's a chart. On the X and Y axis, it shows the inches of the photo and it shows the respective amount of megapixels recommended for that. So for example, for a 5x7 inch photo, it's recommended you have at least 3 megapixels. But if you're posting online, your phone camera has more than enough megapixels for that. But that doesn't mean you should only use your phone camera. But it has enough megapixels. We are at a restaurant. We're gonna have dinner with AJ's friends here. But first, why do companies keep on pushing cameras with higher megapixel counts? Well, one, it's easy marketing. They've given us this idea that more megapixels is better and less is worse. So when there's a new device that comes out with more megapixels, it's an easier sell to us. And the second one, specifically for camera brands, is there are some cameras that specifically have high megapixel counts because of what they do. So for example, landscape photography or fashion photography for billboards. Those types of cameras really need high megapixel counts because they're going to be printed really largely, or they're going to be used in such a way that require high megapixels. So some of these cameras include the Canon 5DS and the 5DSR, and the Nikon D850 and the Sony A7R III. So those cameras really have high megapixel counts because some professionals really need all those pixels. So you might be wondering, why should I go for a camera with a higher megapixel count? Well, first, one of the reasons is if you want to do a lot of printing with your work, then you might need one. I've printed large prints of my work, and 24 megapixels is quite good for me, and it's more than enough for a really good print. Another reason is if you want to be able to crop in a lot. With higher megapixel cameras, you'll be able to crop into your photo more to get the composition you want. So with more megapixels, you're able to afford more leeway in cropping and editing your photo. And maybe one more reason off the top of my head would be if you're doing landscapes, because you want to get all that detail. But remember, it's not just the megapixel count that makes a good image. The lens also has to be good enough to capture all that detail that the sensor will get. And before we end, time for dinner. Alright, that was good dinner, and now for my final thoughts on megapixels. So some things to consider when choosing a camera, or choosing how many megapixels you want in your camera, is first and foremost the lens that you're going to put on the camera. So if you have really good glass, then of course make the most out of your megapixels and really pair that with good glass. Second is what you're going to be shooting. What kind of photography are you going to be shooting? If you're shooting portraits, then maybe you don't need such a high megapixel count because you don't really need all those details. But maybe you do. Maybe that's the kind of portraits you like. I don't know. And lastly, where your photo will go and what it's going to be used for. So if it's going to be printed on a giant billboard, then for sure go with as many megapixels as you can. But if you're going to be posting it online or just taking snapshots with your camera, then you don't need as many megapixels because the files will be smaller and easier to handle. Alright, that's about it. Let's go home. We're back home. I hope you guys enjoyed this video about megapixels. If you have any other questions, let me know down in the comments below. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.